tough guy business. And this man is the toughest, most resilient human being that I've ever met in my life.
That was UFC boss Dana White at last year's Republican National Convention. President Trump, it took a while for this to develop, but it really has taken on kind of a life of its own, tied his political brand to the organization that is the UFC and to a certain extent the WWE and its macho reputation. Trump is a mainstay at matches and last week announced plans. We're not sure how serious he was, but he announced them anyway to host a UFC match at the White House to celebrate America's 250th birthday on July 4th, 2026. Already, some of the sport's biggest figures like Conor McGregor and John Jones, who are inactive or retired, are hinting at a return just for this particular event. Ben Fowlkes joins me now. He covers the UFC for Yahoo Sports and the combat sports media company Uncrowned. Ben, thanks so much for making time for me. I appreciate this. Let's start with this thing that President Trump talked about last week. A UFC event, I imagine, on the South Lawn of the White House. What might that look like?
Well, we've seen MMA events on unconventional grounds before, never quite like this. Strikeforce, another now defunct MMA organization, once ran an event at the Playboy Mansion. So it's not as if that kind of thing is completely unprecedented. However, you'd have to imagine audience setup, security, all that kind of stuff would be completely different for something like this. The thing that is not so different is that the UFC is already very comfortable spotlighting Donald Trump when he shows up to these events, especially the numbered pay-per-views that he's been a fixture at recently. They've really tied themselves there. And so it seems the UFC would be pretty comfortable doing something like that. All Donald Trump had to do was kind of speak it out loud, and the UFC seemed like they were eager to jump it to make it a reality. It's just exactly what it would look like is a big question mark at this point.
And Ben, this is, to put it mildly, not exactly my world, but I've been told by people whose world it is that since the president talked about this in Des Moines, it has sort of taken on an extra layer of momentum. People are getting kind of jacked up about this, even though it's a year out.
Well, I think that the fight crowd loves novelty. It loves anything that feels like we're doing something new and different and exciting. And you also have to realize that among pro sports brands, the UFC, its audience, its fighters are a lot more pro-Trump than you see in a lot of other pro sports. I mean, Donald Trump, if he goes right now to, even in his hometown, New York City, if he goes to a Yankees game, if he goes to a Knicks game, he's going to hear some boos if they show him up on the screen. And that's not at all the case at the UFC. It's one of the reasons he seems to really like the UFC and going and appearing at those events is because the crowd there is very excited to see him. The fighters are almost unanimously really happy to see him. He gets to kind of have a love fest sort of environment when he goes to the UFC that doesn't get a lot of other places. And the UFC has really gone all in on that. Like during those events, when he's sitting there, there is a dedicated Trump cam. Somebody will knock somebody else out. And instead of cutting, to that fighter's corner celebrating or following that fighter around the cage as he's celebrating, they'll cut to Donald Trump just to show his reaction to a knockout. So the UFC is really, really spotlighting him there, and he seems to have found like a comfortable home there.
And Ben, for my audience who, like me, this is not our world, talk to us about the UFC scope, the money, the ratings, the global imprint.
The global imprint actually is very interesting, especially as it relates to how firmly the UFC has attached itself to Trump. Because the UFC draws fighters and viewers from all over the globe, a lot more than most other major sports in America. You look at the NFL, and it's almost entirely Americans. You look at Major League Baseball, it's from a relatively small selection of countries. The UFC has fighters from almost everywhere. And right now, in fact, you look at the list of UFC male champions, they don't have a single American on there. It's all fighters from other places. And so that is an interesting aspect as far as how it plays with Trump, who is not quite so popular in a lot of other places in the world. But the UFC, it has kind of a niche audience, but a very dedicated audience. It's known for an audience that will follow it almost anywhere, but also it's still not on a level of viewership with something like the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA. It does have just a hardcore, very dedicated fan base, But the extent to which the UFC has made Trump such a focal point at these events, it has alienated portions of the audience. I hear it all the time from listeners to my podcast, from readers of mine who write in and say, I just can't take the extent to which they're shoving, the MAGA movement down our throats every time when I'm just trying to watch some fights. I think the UFC has done the math on it and decided, what we get in terms of viewers who do like it and in terms of the various ways we're able to translate being a pro MAGA brand into money from sponsors, that's worth losing some viewers who don't like it.
Ben Fowlkes, thanks for walking me through all this. Not my world, but it's definitely yours, and you were a great person to have on the program to help us understand it better. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.